Now, but let's allow everybody to say their bit. There's no need of interrupting anyone. In fact, I think you may wish to be reminded that under Article 102, it is a term of Parliament. When does a term of Parliament end? And what is the practice the world over? Business, we have to review, each outgoing Parliament has to review the standing orders, not for itself, but for the other Parliament, because it is deemed to be different. Yeah, that's the truth. That's why in many jurisdictions, what may have obtained in another term is not business, cannot be considered by any other Parliament. Let me. We are discussing the issue of gender parity. You allow me to also now hear some different voice. Now, member for Suba North, I can see you are itching to say something. Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say from the onset that I agree with the Honorable Chief Justice in his decision, and I want to speak as a lawyer and as a person who comes from the background of gender activism. There's nothing wrong with being a gender activist. We are all activists for our constituents. So the same way I'm also an activist of Suba North and of fishermen, I'm also an activist of gender. And I have no apology for that. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the Parliament of Kenya has done its bit. We have brought this several bills before this House so many times before, and Parliament has expressed itself. Parliament does not have to express itself only in one direction. Parliament can say a yes, and Parliament can say a no. And Parliament has said a no. And Parliament having said a no, the matter moves to a different authority. And the different authority here is the Chief Justice. Nobody abused Parliament when Parliament made its own decision. The Chief Justice has also made his own decision based on Article 261(7) of the Constitution. And it is nothing personal. So I think if we really want to help this country and this House, let us depersonalize the attacks against the Chief Justice, because he's basically doing his work. He's extricated himself and is finished, and that's why Honorable Tiende is calling him factus officio in this matter. The matter has now gone to the President, who will either decide to dissolve Parliament, or because there is that lapse in the Constitution about timelines, he can choose to dilly-dally. And if he wanted to help Parliament, for instance, he can choose to dilly-dally. But Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I want to say is this, that let us be very serious the way we deal with this issue as a Parliament. And the reason we want to be serious with it is that we will deal legally, and the Chief Justice has dealt legally. But there is also politics. And once it has gone to the President, none of us can say with authority that they know how the President is going to deal. He can't actually dissolve Parliament. And once he dissolves Parliament, you are home. Personally, I'm not scared, and I'm willing to go home, and I'm willing to be elected or be thrown out, because it's not about me. One thing I am very sure about is that even if I'm not elected, somebody from Suba North will be elected. The issue is about standing on principle, and I stand on the principle of gender equality. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I just want to indicate that on my view as a lawyer, people have been talking about what kind of elections can we have. This general election that I think Honorable Duale has been referring to, because he was saying you need to read. I don't want to recite all the authorities that he's saying about. And there's the by-election that some members have been talking about. And each of them has its own consequences, depending on which one we choose to interpret it by. But Mr. Speaker, if you look at this article, it actually talks about an election sui generis, which is neither general nor by election. it would be an election sui generis. And it's not just sui generis for purposes of our own elections, but in the world, because there is no precedent or constitutional precedent from other countries with this provision. It is actually a provision that is very Kenyan. Just like Honorable Odhiambo, who sat in the committee, I also have legislative history, and I know why we came up with this. And if we actually go to legislative history, it will show you why we came up with this. And I sat in the Constitutional Implementation Oversight Committee in the 10th Parliament as the Vice Chair. And we actually rushed to ensure that we pass this because of this article in the Constitution. And the reason we are doing that is because we were concerned about Parliament failing, as has been the history in the country, to pass certain laws. Mr. Speaker, let us be sober. I would urge that we come up with a team in this House to look at this matter from a very sober perspective. The only thing I agree with the Honorable Duale is on the issue of unity of purpose. Not because I fear going back home, but because we need to be sober in the manner that we deal with this issue. It is not a men versus women campaign or fight. It is an issue that is of interest to Kenyans. I know very many male members are telling me, and some have been calling me saying, don't support because you are elected. It's not about me as Millie Odhiambo. It's about a principle. And that is why, for instance, Mr. Speaker, that we were having this impasse at the Senate about revenue. And revenue was about minorities and minority communities that are feeling let out. It's the same manner and the same challenges that women face, that persons with disabilities face, that youth face. And when we start using this kind of approach, then we'll cut them out forever, Mr. Speaker. Let us be sober. Let us give a working solution. Mr. Speaker, I would want to say the Parliamentary Service Commission, I don't have a problem with Parliamentary Service Commission going to court because it's actually the right of the Parliamentary Service Commission. But even as the Commission has gone to court, which will may buy us some time, let us also be alive to political realities and find a way out, get a small team from among parliamentarians with the diverse views and seek for a way out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Because we have spent some little time trying to argue as to why Article 100 should not have been the first attempt before you went to the many, many attempts to amend the Constitution, Articles 97 and 98. But finally, this Parliament, this National Assembly, at least under the leadership of the Honorable Kioni, did bring the necessary legislation. And reading through the report, one can see that there was consultation across board. Many stakeholders were consulted when that bill was being developed. And I think all that we are waiting for is for the Senate to deal with the bill. I only hope that the Senate will not put it in the coolers, because we need to have movement. That bill addresses the issue of representation of women, youth, persons with disabilities, minorities, and marginalized. So in that respect, and that bill was supposed to be enacted within a period of 5 years. And I've said it several. That's one law that really should not have taken that long. But the Honorable Millie Odhiambo and many others of our colleagues would know that we have had arguments about whether that is the route to go or we should go the route of amending the Constitution, Article 97 and 98. Honorable Kainan, you wanted to weigh in.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree with those who have said that we need to have unity of purpose. Mr. Speaker, this issue of gender equity has been around since time immemorial. Mr. Speaker, when the CJ of the Republic of Kenya issued that edict, whether it was administrative, whether it was judicial, I do not know. In my mind, what came first to my mind is what happened to this very important principle called national interest. Mr. Speaker, there are certain things that cannot be documented. There are certain things that cannot be written. But in any country, in any civilized country, national interest outweighs any other interest, whether written or unwritten, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, We have had just one by-election pending in one constituency called Msambweni. Even the body that is tasked with conducting elections realized that under the circumstances, under the COVID crisis, under this pandemic, holding one special election was difficult. And here somebody comes and says, go back for a general election, because literally what this means is a general election. Mr. Speaker, I've had in many other jurisdictions that there used to be something called judicial gerrymandering. The reason why I say this, Mr. Speaker, is ideally the other two arms of government are supposed to be offshoots of Parliament, and that is what the framers of the current Constitution and Article 1 had in mind. Mr. Speaker, what I see, even the framers of the current Constitution do not want to take an explicit position on the issue of gender equity. You realize, even under the current Constitution, it's like they never wanted to take a position. This issue was referred to the judiciary. They never wanted to take a position. And yet they expected Parliament, which is a product of one man, one vote, to come up with a formula that none of them, whether in the civil society, whether in the judiciary, failed to take a position. And Mr. Speaker, therefore, what this means is that the failures, the individuals or the groups who have failed in the other two arms of government want to reduce Parliament to a punching bag. And Mr. Speaker, this is one thing that we should not accept. This is politics. This is politics. This is politicizing the institution of Parliament. And Mr. Speaker, I want to stand here and say what you did yesterday was the right thing. And even all the other lawyers with sober minds, all the other lawyers, including Grand Mullah, who have expanded their horizon of thinking outside the petty politics of their sectarian interests, Mr. Speaker, have supported your position. And that is the position today we as the PSC today had a crisis meeting under the leadership of the Speaker and resolved on your behalf to challenge this thing in all the courts possible. And that is the task, and that is the mandate of the PSC. It's not something that we want to do out of the blue, but it's something that has really something that we really feel that must be done. Because how do you just come up one morning without giving notice to the Speaker of the National Assembly, without giving notice to the Speaker of the Senate, and you just say you have advised the President? I do know the President is also the head of a civilized nation called Kenya. There's national interest. Mr. Speaker, I'm told when you want to become celebrated and you want to be honored by the international players, in particular the international actors, in the name of NGOs, you must do something so radical that you become sensationally covered in the newspapers. And I think this is one thing. So I don't want to discuss the details or the substance of, or the content of what the CJ did. But honestly, if you dissect it, isn't it meant to trigger something else outside the retirement? The pending retirement, and that is the essence. And therefore, Parliament is the easiest institution to use as a punching bag. Please, I want to beg you. It is not about your electability. It is not about whether you will be re-elected or not. It's about this principle of Parliament being used as a punching bag. I was there in the 10th Parliament. I was there in the 11th Parliament. I am here in the 12th Parliament. How comes it failed the attention of all those who are there to sort out this? Why will you attribute it to Parliament? Why do you want to negate the very principle of free and fair election? If the people of Eldas decide to have a lady as their representative, they will have it. If they have decided to have Aden Kainan as the representative, then that should not be impaired at any circumstance, Mr. Speaker. And this is why I'm saying, for the sake of this institution, and I know we will not be the last Parliament. We are not the first Parliament. Our Honorable Dali has actually alluded to this. In the 10th Parliament, they tried. Mother Karua was one of the best gender activists. I will say this, equivalent to Millie. She was a Minister for Justice. She had an opportunity to fix that thing. Actually, the circumstances at that particular time were easier. They didn't do it. They left it to Parliament. It came to 11th Parliament. It didn't happen. It came to 12th Parliament. It started happening. Somebody wants to spoil our image. This is one thing that we must reject. Finally, Mr. Speaker, when a crisis like this, the whole world is right now affected by the COVID crisis. Where will the money to conduct a general election come from? Because we all know where we are right now. And Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this is not a matter for so and so. Please, let's debate it soberly. Let's approach it soberly so that as a House, we address this issue with our open mind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.